What if I told you that wealth is not locked in your degree, not buried in years of back-breaking labor, not chained to the economy, but hidden in a single psalm? What if I told you that when you speak this psalm with faith, invisible walls crumble, opportunities appear from nowhere, and blessings rush in like a flood? And what if I told you that this overflow is not waiting for 10 years from now, not for someday in the distant future, but it's hovering over you right now, waiting for your voice to release it? In the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you the exact psalm I spoke that turned my lack into abundance and opened the floodgates of divine wealth into my life. And if you stay with me until the end, your entire perspective on money, faith, and prosperity will shift forever. So before we begin, do me a favor. Tap that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because today could be the very day your psalm of wealth begins to manifest. The hidden power of the spoken word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was not just a sound, but a living force. The universe itself was created by spoken words, and the same law that brought forth the heavens, the seas, the earth, and all that is in it, is the very same law that governs our lives today. Words are not mere vibrations of air. They are spiritual decrees that summon into form the unseen into the seen. To understand this truth is to understand that every time we open our mouths, we either invite lack or we invite abundance. We either affirm fear or we affirm faith. We either call forth limitation or we call forth divine supply. When I first discovered the hidden power of the spoken word, it felt as if I had found a buried treasure chest. For years, I lived under the illusion that effort alone, toil alone, and striving alone would bring prosperity. But effort without alignment is like planting seeds in barren soil. They may sprout, but they wither quickly. The soil of manifestation is the word spoken in faith. And when that word is the living psalm, breathed with conviction, it carries the creative power of divine law. A psalm is not just a collection of sacred verses, it is a key, a code, a spiritual decree. When spoken with faith, the psalm becomes a law in motion. Its vibration penetrates fear, dissolves obstacles, and summons divine provision from unseen channels. It is like striking a tuning fork that harmonizes your life with the frequency of heaven's abundance. The hidden power is not in merely reading the psalm silently, but in speaking it aloud, declaring it, giving breath to the living word. Breath is life, and when life meets the word of God, creation is inevitable. There is a profound mystery in the way words travel. When you speak, they do not vanish into thin air, they carve paths in the invisible, they instruct energy, they command substance to move, and they send out decrees that cannot return void. The ancient law is that what is spoken in faith must come to pass. And so, when I began to speak the psalm not as a ritual, but as a decree, I discovered that my words were not empty. They were seeds filled with power. Every fear-filled word I had spoken in the past had planted weeds in my garden of life. Every complaint, every utterance of doubt, every phrase of, "I can't afford," or, "It's too difficult," had manifested as struggle. But when I replaced these with divine decrees from the psalm, I witnessed the weeds wither and new blossoms of provision spring forth. The spoken word is not just communication, it is creation. The secret is this. The psalm carries a divine vibration that aligns the one who speaks it with the eternal law of abundance. It awakens the consciousness to recognize that lack is an illusion, that struggle is a misalignment, and that the universe itself was designed to flow with wealth, supply, and overflow. When the psalm is spoken, the subconscious mind receives it as a command, and all of life reorganizes itself to fulfill that command. I remember vividly the moment when this truth first revealed itself to me. My heart was heavy with uncertainty. I looked at the stack of bills, the lack of opportunity, the seeming impossibility of change. I thought, how can a few words shift this mountain? But the Spirit whispered, "Speak the psalm." I spoke it with trembling lips, with a mixture of faith and doubt, yet I spoke it. And something remarkable happened. not outside me first, but inside me, a peace descended upon my soul, and with it, a quiet certainty that provision was already on its way. That was the beginning of the transformation. I continued to speak the psalm. Day after day, night after night, with each declaration my faith deepened. I began to notice how the atmosphere shifted. Opportunities that had once been closed suddenly opened. People who had long forgotten me reappeared, bringing with them unexpected blessings. New streams of income flowed from directions I had never considered. It was as though invisible doors were swinging wide at the sound of the psalm. The power of the spoken word lies not only in the vibration but in the authority it carries. Every time you speak the psalm, you affirm divine truth over earthly appearance. You look lack in the eye and declare, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." You confront fear with the decree, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" You dismantle anxiety with the living word that wealth, provision, and supply are already yours. Each time you speak, you establish a law that nothing can overturn. This is why it is not enough to think about prosperity. It must be spoken. Thought creates, but speech seals. The thought is the plan, the blueprint. The spoken word is the hammer that drives the nail, the act that brings the plan into visible form. The world itself was not thought into existence, it was spoken into existence. Let there be light, and light appeared. In the same way, let there be wealth, and wealth must appear. The psalm is a divine contract, a covenant spoken aloud. It carries the very breath of spirit, and when you align your breath with it, you breathe into existence the prosperity you seek. Many read the words silently, but the spoken word has a far greater impact because it does not just shape the mind. It shapes the air, the energy, the vibration around you. It becomes a decree that heaven and earth respond to. As I continued speaking the psalm, I realized it was not just money that began to flow into my life, but peace, health, joy, and relationships. Wealth is not merely financial, it is the fullness of life. The psalm called forth abundance in every area. My home became filled with harmony, my days with opportunity, and my nights with rest. The more I spoke, the more I understood that the word had always been the hidden key, and I had carried it in my mouth all along. The hidden power of the spoken word is that it transforms the one who speaks it. It reshapes the inner landscape, uproots the weeds of fear, plants the seeds of faith, waters them with repetition, and then commands the harvest into reality. The psalm, spoken faithfully, becomes the river that floods your life with supply. What was once dry becomes fertile. What was once empty becomes overflowing, and it all begins with the word spoken. The psalm declared, the truth affirmed aloud. Faith over fear, faith and fear cannot live in the same house. They are opposites, like light and darkness, and when one enters, the other must leave. The psalm, when spoken, becomes a door through which faith enters, and fear is cast out. It is impossible to hold the vibration of divine truth and cling to the vibration of doubt at the same time. One dissolves the other, and the choice is always ours. We may choose to dwell in fear, replaying the stories of lack, shortage, and impossibility, or we may lift our voice and speak the psalm until faith swells in the soul and drives fear into the shadows. Fear is the great robber. It steals opportunities before they arrive. It whispers lies that the blessing is too far, too impossible, too much for us. Fear makes us shrink from doors that have already been opened. It blinds the eyes so that we cannot see the supply standing right before us. Faith, however, is the great restorer. Faith lifts the veil, clears the vision, and opens the hand to receive what God has already given. Faith is not something we strive to have. It is something we choose to activate through the spoken word, and the psalm is the sword with which faith cuts down fear. Every time the psalm is spoken, fear loses its grip. For fear thrives in silence, in unspoken doubt, in the unchallenged whispers of the mind. But the moment faith-filled words are spoken, they clash with fear and drive it out. That is why the psalm must be more than a gentle thought. It must be a decree, an utterance that carries authority. The words of the psalm are not fragile. They are mighty, sharper than any two-edged sword, and they slice through fear's illusion like lightning through darkness. I recall a season when fear tried to cage me. Every bill that came in the mail looked like a mountain. Every responsibility felt like a burden too heavy to carry. Fear sat at my table, spoke in my ear, and tried to convince me that lack would be my lifelong companion. But in that season, I learned the power of replacing fear's lies with the words of the psalm. When fear whispered, "You will not make it," I declared aloud, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." When fear said, "You will lose everything," I spoke, "The Lord is my refuge and my fortress, in him will I trust." Each spoken word was like a stone hurled at fear's giant frame, and with each declaration, fear grew weaker. Faith is not the absence of problems. It is the presence of divine certainty that the solution already exists. Fear tells you to measure the size of your problem. Faith tells you to measure the size of your God. Fear shrinks the vision. Faith expands it. Fear builds walls. Faith builds bridges. And the psalm is the divine reminder that God's supply knows no limitation. The words carry faith into the bones, into the bloodstream, into the very atmosphere. To speak them is to summon courage from a source greater than yourself. When I began to live by faith instead of fear, I noticed how quickly life rearranged itself. Opportunities I once avoided out of intimidation suddenly became paths I walked boldly. Conversations I once feared to have became channels of blessing. Choices I once delayed out of doubt became stepping stones to prosperity. Faith transforms hesitation into action, and action into manifestation. Fear had held the door shut, but faith flung it wide open. Fear is cunning because it often disguises itself as caution, logic, or prudence. It says, "Wait until you have more evidence." It says, "Do not take that risk." It says, "Stay where you are, for it is safer." But what fear calls safe, faith calls stagnant. What fear calls logical, faith calls limiting. Faith is not reckless. It is trust in divine order, knowing that what is spoken in alignment with truth cannot fail. The psalm trains the heart to trust in divine provision rather than human calculation. It teaches that lack is not real, that poverty is not truth, that the universe is already overflowing with supply, and that fear is nothing but a shadow with no substance. Faith requires us to act as if the blessing is already ours. When the psalm is spoken, it is not a plea but a proclamation. It is not asking for provision. It is affirming that provision is already present. Fear begs, but faith declares. Fear says, "What if it doesn't happen?" Faith says, "It is already done." The psalm lifts the soul into the vibration of certainty, and certainty is the magnet of miracles. There is a sacred shift that takes place when one speaks the psalm consistently. At first, it may feel like repetition against the loud voice of fear. The heart may tremble, the mind may argue, and the circumstances may shout otherwise. But as the words are spoken over and over, faith begins to grow roots. The roots of faith dig deep into the soil of divine truth, anchoring the soul so firmly that no storm of fear can uproot it. The psalm is not a one-time utterance but a continual practice, a shield that grows stronger with each declaration. The battle between faith and fear is not fought on the outside, but on the inside. It is not about whether there is money in the bank, but whether you believe the source of all supply is already working in your favor. It is not about whether opportunities are visible, but whether you trust that unseen doors are swinging open. Fear is conquered not by waiting for circumstances to change, but by speaking words that command circumstances to align with divine truth. The psalm is that command. As I continued to declare the psalm, I found myself walking lighter, breathing easier, smiling more often. Faith had taken root, and fear no longer had a seat at my table. The same bills still came, but they were paid with ease. The same responsibilities remained, but strength arose to carry them effortlessly. The same challenges appeared, but they no longer looked like mountains. They looked like stepping stones. This is the transformation faith brings. It does not erase challenges, it dissolves fear, and when fear dissolves, challenges shrink to their rightful size. The wealth that flooded into my life did not come because I fought harder, worked longer, or worried more. It came because I replaced fear with faith, and faith opened channels that fear had blocked. Where fear saw only closed doors, faith saw open windows. Where fear said, "Not enough," faith declared, "More than enough." Where fear expected loss, faith expected overflow. The psalm became the constant reminder that divine supply is infinite, and fear has no claim in the presence of that infinity. Faith is the golden key, and fear is the locked door. The psalm is the hand that turns the key, swinging open the door to wealth, to provision, to abundance. The more it is spoken, the more natural faith becomes. The more faith grows, the less room fear has to dwell, and soon, life itself becomes a reflection of the truth spoken aloud, that we are guided, provided for, protected, and supplied without limit. Divine timing and sudden overflow. There is a rhythm to life that no human hand can control, a divine order that orchestrates events with perfect precision. Just as the sun rises without delay, just as the tide moves according to an unseen command, so does supply arrive at the appointed hour. When the psalm is spoken in faith, it aligns the soul with this rhythm, this divine timing that cannot be hurried, and yet never comes too late. The human mind often wants to push, to force, to demand results before the soil has had time to bear fruit. But divine timing is not bound by impatience. It is set by law, and when the word is spoken, that law begins to move, preparing, arranging, shifting, and releasing at the exact moment when the soul is ready to receive. The most remarkable thing about divine timing is how sudden it often feels. To the one waiting, it may seem as though nothing is happening. Days may pass with no sign of change. Weeks may unfold with no visible evidence. But beneath the surface, unseen roots are spreading, unseen doors are being carved, unseen connections are being drawn. Then suddenly, without warning, the blessing breaks through like a flood, and what seemed delayed appears overnight. Divine timing feels like a delay to the impatient, but it is always sudden to the prepared. I recall a season when I spoke the psalm daily, yet saw no outward shift. At first, discouragement tried to creep in. The mind said, "Where is the evidence? Why are things still the same?" But the Spirit whispered, "Hold to the word, for the word cannot fail." So I continued, speaking with conviction, declaring truth over appearance. Then one day, without any forewarning, provision came rushing in from a channel I had never expected. A debt was cancelled, an opportunity opened. A financial door that had been sealed tight for years swung open effortlessly. It felt like a flood, like a river that had been dammed and suddenly released. That is the nature of divine timing. It gathers silently, then breaks forth in sudden overflow. The psalm does not only promise supply, it prepares the heart to recognize supply when it comes. Without faith, even abundance can be overlooked. How many stand in the presence of opportunity yet dismiss it because fear clouds their vision? How many walk past blessings unaware because they are focused on appearances? But when the psalm is spoken, the eyes of faith open, and when divine timing releases the flood, the soul knows exactly what to do, where to step, and how to receive. Divine timing is perfect because it aligns not only with the outer circumstances, but with the inner readiness of the soul. If wealth were to arrive before the heart had been stretched to hold it, it would slip through the hands. If opportunities were granted before the mind had been renewed, they would be wasted. The psalm works not just in the outer world but within, strengthening the container of the soul so that when the overflow comes, it can be sustained. The flood is not a trickle, not a temporary blessing. It is an enduring stream, because the one who has been prepared by faith can hold it, steward it, and multiply it. What may look like a delay is often divine preparation. Each spoken word of the psalm tills the soil of the soul, removing stones of doubt, pulling weeds of fear, enriching the ground with truth. When the harvest finally bursts forth, it does not come as a meager crop. It comes as a sudden overflow, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. It is divine law that the spoken word returns multiplied, and the multiplication comes at the appointed season, not a moment too soon or too late. The flood of wealth is not always financial at first. Sometimes it begins with a flood of ideas, a sudden inspiration, a vision that shifts everything. Sometimes it is a flood of favor, people appearing at the right time, connections being made, doors being unlocked by others who carry the key. Sometimes it is a flood of peace, the kind that stills the storm within and prepares the heart to receive what is about to manifest without. And sometimes it is a flood of material supply, money, resources, opportunities, all arriving as though the heavens opened in an instant. Divine timing chooses the channel, and the psalm ensures the channel is always the right one. There is a deep peace that comes when one surrenders to divine timing. Anxiety dissolves, impatience fades, and trust takes root. The psalm becomes a daily reminder that the flow of abundance cannot be missed, because what is divinely appointed cannot be lost. If a door shuts, it is not denial but redirection. If a delay occurs, it is not rejection but preparation. Faith rests in the knowledge that when the flood comes, it will be more than enough, arriving with such force that years of struggle are washed away in an instant. I remember the day when I experienced this truth most vividly. For months I had been in a drought. Work slowed, opportunities dried up, and everything seemed stagnant. I spoke the psalm over and over, believing though I could not yet see. Then suddenly, in a single week, more came into my hands than I had earned in years. It was as if the heavens themselves poured out their storehouses, and I stood in awe. That is divine timing. Silent preparation followed by sudden overflow. This suddenness is not chaos but design. The universe gathers momentum behind the scenes, and when all aligns, the blessing must burst forth with unstoppable power. Like rain held in the clouds, it cannot be contained forever. It must fall, and when it does, it nourishes everything it touches. The psalm spoken in faith draws the rain. It calls the clouds, gathers the supply, and summons the release. And though it may seem quiet for a season, the outpouring is certain, and when it arrives it overwhelms. The mind often asks, when? But faith answers, no. In the invisible, the supply is always now. In the visible, it manifests at the appointed moment. This is why the psalm is not a plea for the future, but a declaration of the present. Each time it is spoken, it anchors the soul in the truth that the flood is already moving toward you, that divine timing is unfolding in perfection, and that overflow is inevitable. The flood is not the result of striving but of aligning, not of worrying but of declaring, not of fear but of faith. And so the soul learns to trust the process, to rest in divine order, to speak the psalm daily not with impatience but with expectancy. Every word spoken is a seed planted, and though the seed does not sprout the next morning, it is germinating, it is alive, and when the season arrives, it breaks through the soil with abundance. The harvest may look sudden, but it has been building all along. What seemed empty suddenly overflows. What seemed barren suddenly blooms. What seemed impossible suddenly manifests in grandeur. The psalm is the bridge between faith and manifestation. It is the declaration that invites divine timing to reveal itself in sudden ways. It is the reminder that lack is a temporary illusion, and supply is an eternal reality. When spoken, it prepares the soul for the flood, and when the flood arrives, it comes not as a drip but as a river, not as a fragment but as fullness, not as a moment but as a new way of living. The law of prosperity is not a random gift given to some and withheld from others. It is not determined by luck, nor is it controlled by human favoritism. Prosperity is a law, fixed, eternal, unchangeable. Just as gravity holds the planets in orbit and ensures that rivers flow to the sea, so does the law of prosperity govern the flow of supply to every soul who aligns with it. The psalm, when spoken, is not a wish for prosperity, but a call to awaken to the law that has been operating since the beginning of creation. The world often teaches that prosperity is the product of struggle, that it must be wrestled from the hands of fate, earned with sweat, and fought for an endless toil. Yet struggle alone does not guarantee abundance. Many toil and find themselves still in lack, still pressed under burdens. The truth is that prosperity flows not from strain, but from alignment with divine law. The one who aligns, even with little effort, experiences greater supply than the one who strives without alignment. This is why the psalm is so powerful. It repositions the soul under the law of prosperity, affirming that supply is natural, not forced, and abundance is inevitable, not accidental. The law of prosperity states that we receive not according to our labor, but according to our faith. Work has its place, but work without faith becomes drudgery. Effort is necessary, but effort without divine alignment becomes wasted energy. When the psalm is spoken, it infuses work with power, it infuses effort with multiplication. It calls forth the hidden opportunities, the unexpected channels, the divine connections that no amount of striving could have produced. Prosperity is not earned, it is received. And it is received by those who understand the law and declare it with their words. There is no lack in the universe. The illusion of lack comes only from misalignment. Nature itself testifies to this truth. The trees do not strain to produce fruit. They simply yield to the law of their being, and abundance flows forth. The rivers do not worry about whether they will reach the ocean. They flow naturally, guided by law. The birds do not toil with anxious hearts, yet they are fed each morning, clothed with beauty greater than kings. Prosperity is woven into creation itself, and the same law that governs nature governs humanity. When the psalm is spoken, it reminds the soul that just as the lilies are clothed, and the sparrows are fed, so too are we provided for in abundance. The psalm is more than words. It is a decree of the law of prosperity. When one declares, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," it is not mere comfort, it is the law in motion. To say, "I shall not want," is to align with the eternal truth that want has no reality in divine order. Lack is not real in the kingdom of spirit, for supply is infinite, flowing, unending. To speak this truth is to reject the illusion of shortage and to stand firmly in the law of prosperity, where overflow is natural. When I first began to understand this, it was as though scales fell from my eyes. I had believed that prosperity belonged only to the fortunate, that it required endless labor, that it was reserved for the select few who managed to climb to the top of the world's ladder. But the psalm taught me differently. It showed me that prosperity is my divine birthright, already secured, already present, already flowing. My task was not to chase it but to align with it, not to beg for it but to declare it, not to fear its absence but to affirm its presence. The law of prosperity responds not to desperation but to conviction. The spoken word is the mechanism by which we align with this law. Silence keeps the law dormant, but the word spoken in faith awakens it. Every time the psalm is spoken, the law of prosperity is affirmed in the atmosphere. The subconscious mind begins to accept it as truth, the body begins to act in alignment with it, and the universe begins to arrange itself accordingly. Channels open, doors appear, ideas flow, and provision manifests because the law must respond to the word. Just as a seed must sprout when planted in fertile soil, so must prosperity manifest when spoken in faith. It is important to understand that prosperity is not limited to money, though money is included. Prosperity is fullness of life, the overflow of all good things, health, joy, relationships, peace, creativity, and opportunities. To reduce prosperity to money alone is to misunderstand its vastness. Money is only one channel, one expression of the greater abundance that surrounds us. The psalm speaks to every form of prosperity, for it is not about one blessing, but about the flood of all blessings. When the psalm declares that there is no want, it is not only financial want that is dissolved, but every form of want, emotional, spiritual, relational, and physical. The law of prosperity is impartial. It does not favor one and neglect another. It is as available as the air we breathe. But just as one must inhale to receive oxygen, so too must one speak the word to receive prosperity. The air is present, but without breath, it does not enter. Prosperity is present, but without faith-filled words, it does not manifest. The psalm is the breath that inhales abundance, the declaration that draws prosperity into form. There was a time when I looked at others and wondered why prosperity seemed to flow to them while I remained in lack. I thought perhaps they were lucky, or perhaps I was cursed. But when I discovered the law of prosperity, I realized it was not about favoritism, but about alignment. Those who prospered were, knowingly or unknowingly, aligned with the law. They expected good, and so good flowed. They spoke abundance, and so abundance manifested. The law is impartial. It gives to all who align, and it withholds from none. When I began to speak the psalm daily, I noticed the shift immediately. Ideas came to me that had never come before. People reached out with opportunities I had not asked for. Unexpected channels of income opened. Needs were met before I could even speak them aloud. This was not a coincidence, it was the law of prosperity in motion. My words had aligned me, and once aligned, the flood could not be stopped. To live by the law of prosperity is to release struggle and embrace trust. It is known that wealth is not manufactured but manifested. It is to walk each day with confidence that provision is already flowing. The psalm is not a chant of desperation but a decree of certainty. Each time it is spoken, it cements the truth deeper into the soul until doubt vanishes and faith becomes second nature. The law of prosperity then becomes not just something believed but something lived, and life itself becomes an endless unfolding of abundance. The law of prosperity demands expression. Just as water seeks an outlet, so does abundance seek to flow. When the psalm is spoken, it opens the channel, allowing the flood to pour forth. If blocked by fear, doubt, or negative words, prosperity appears to dry up. Though in truth it never ceases to flow, it only waits for alignment. But the moment alignment is restored through the spoken psalm, the river rushes again, bringing with it more than enough, overflowing, unstoppable, abundant. Living testimony of transformation. Every truth must be lived before it can become a testimony. Words spoken without experience are mere echoes, but words lived through the fire of testing become power, authority, and life. The psalm was not given to me as a theory, nor as a religious form to recite mindlessly. It was given as a living key, and when I turned that key with my own voice, I unlocked a door that changed everything. My life itself became the evidence that the spoken word holds power, that faith is stronger than fear, and that prosperity is not a distant promise, but a present reality. There was a time when lack seemed to follow me like a shadow. No matter how hard I worked, there was never enough. Just when I thought progress had been made, some unexpected expense would sweep it all away. The cycle repeated until it felt as though I was trapped in a prison of limitation. My mind rehearsed the story of struggle so often that it became my identity. I spoke without even realizing it. I said, "I can't afford this. I never have enough. Money slips through my hands." And so it was. For the law responds to words, whether words of truth or words of fear. It was in this season of despair that the psalm came alive for me. I had read it before, but this time it was different. Something inside urged me not to simply read it silently, but to speak it. At first, my lips trembled as I declared, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The evidence around me contradicted it. The bills stacked on the table mocked me. The emptiness in my bank account argued against it, but I kept speaking. Each time I did, a spark of faith flickered within, faint but undeniable. That flicker was the beginning of the transformation. I began to notice that my inner dialogue was changing. Where I once spoke words of defeat, I now countered them with the psalm. When fear whispered, "You will fail," I answered aloud, "I shall not want." When doubt said, "This is impossible," I declared, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." Slowly, the weeds of fear began to wither, and the seeds of faith began to sprout. My outer circumstances had not yet shifted, but my inner world was being renewed, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the outer caught up with the inner. Then came the first sign. A small but unexpected provision arrived, enough to cover what I lacked in that moment. It may have looked insignificant to others, but to me, it was a miracle, the proof that the word was working. It was the first drop of rain before the storm of abundance. That small provision strengthened my faith, and I spoke the psalm with greater boldness. Soon after, larger doors opened. Opportunities flowed from places I had never even looked. Debts were cleared, not by my striving but by divine orchestration. Money came, yes, but with it came peace, health, relationships, and joy. My life, once marked by lack, began to overflow. The psalm became not just a verse but the soundtrack of my life. I spoke it when I woke. I spoke as I worked. I spoke about it before I slept. Each time, I was not begging God to move. I was affirming that God had already moved. I was not asking for provision. I was declaring that provision was already mine. That shift, from asking to declaring, from pleading to proclaiming, was the turning point. For the law of prosperity responds not to desperation but to certainty, and my certainty grew with every declaration. Looking back, I see how the transformation unfolded in layers. First, my mind shifted. The psalm reprogrammed my thoughts from lack to abundance, from fear to faith. Then, my words shifted. No longer did I speak of struggle, instead I spoke of provision. Then my actions shifted. Empowered by faith, I began to take bold steps I would have once avoided. And finally, my circumstances shifted, aligning with the inner transformation that had already taken root. This is the order: the inner always precedes the outer, and the psalm is the bridge between them. What amazes me most is not just the provision that came, but the speed with which it came once faith was firmly established. For years, I had labored with little result, but once I aligned with the word, overflow arrived suddenly, almost effortlessly. This is why I call it a flood, because it did not trickle in slowly, it poured in, washing away years of lack and setting me on a new foundation of prosperity. What toil could not achieve, the spoken word manifested. What effort could not secure, faith delivered. My testimony is not unique. I have shared this truth with others, and I have seen it work the same way in their lives. A mother who struggled to provide for her children began speaking the psalm daily, and within weeks, unexpected help arrived, followed by steady provision that carried her family. A man drowning in debt declared the psalm morning and night, and opportunities appeared that lifted him out of debt faster than he had ever imagined. A woman battling sickness spoke the psalm with conviction, and not only did her health improve, but her finances flourished as well. The testimony is not mine alone, it belongs to all who will believe, speak, and align. The psalm transforms because it is not just words on a page. It is living truth, sharper than fear, stronger than doubt, greater than limitation. To speak is to wield power, to command law, to awaken divine order. My life stands as proof that no one is beyond the reach of its power. I was not born into wealth, nor did I inherit fortune. What I inherited was the same as everyone else, the gift of the spoken word, and the ability to align with divine law. That was enough, and it will always be enough. Even now, wealth continues to flow, but I no longer chase it. I know it is drawn to me as naturally as rivers flow to the sea. My task is simple: to keep speaking the psalm, to keep affirming the truth, to keep aligning with divine law. Each day, my life expands in prosperity, not because I strive harder, but because I continue to live in the vibration of faith. The psalm is my anchor, my reminder, my testimony. I need not convince anyone with arguments, for the evidence is my life. Where once there was a lack, there is now overflow. Where once there was fear, there is now peace. Where once there was doubt, there is now certainty. My story is living proof that the psalm, when spoken with faith, does not fail. It carries within it the law of prosperity, the power of divine timing, the authority to banish fear, and the key to unlock abundance. My transformation is not a tale of chance but of law, not of luck but of alignment, not of struggle but of surrender to truth. Beloved, you have now seen the living proof of what the spoken word can do. You have walked with me, through the hidden power of the spoken word, where sound becomes substance and vibration becomes manifestation. You have seen that faith, when enthroned above fear, unlocks doors no human hand could open. You have witnessed how divine timing does not creep in slowly, but floods suddenly, like a river breaking through its dam. You have discovered that prosperity is not earned through endless toil, but summoned by aligning with divine law, where effort is replaced by flow and struggle is exchanged for supply. And you have heard the living testimony of transformation, the undeniable evidence that a single psalm, spoken with conviction, can turn lack into overflow, despair into joy, and fear into faith. The psalm is more than ancient words. It is a living current, a spiritual decree that awakens what has always been yours. Every time you speak it, you plant seeds of truth into the soil of your mind, and those seeds cannot remain barren. They must grow, they must multiply, they must overflow into your life as prosperity, health, peace, and joy. Do not wait for circumstances to change before you speak. Speak, and the circumstances must change. Do not wait for wealth to appear before you believe. Believe, and wealth must appear. Do not wait for doors to open before you act. Declare the word, and the doors will swing wide. The law does not play favorites. It responds to all who speak with faith. Just as the psalm transformed me, it will transform you. Just as it turned my lack into overflow, it will do the same for you. What you declare with unwavering conviction becomes the pattern of your life. What you affirm daily becomes the foundation of your destiny. So I tell you this, the word is near you, even in your mouth. Speak it, believe it, live it, and watch how quickly the floodgates open. The Lord is your shepherd, and you shall not want. That is the truth, that is the law, that is your inheritance. And once you take hold of it, once you align with it, once you declare it, nothing and no one can take it from you.